Recently, I have been seeing the rise of a lot of serial killers on social media, which is kinda awkward since people glorify them or even make fan cams, which is very weird. But one thing that caught my eye recently was a recent Netflix series that was an interesting watch to say the least. After watching the show, I wanted to know what had happened during this time and what truly went down. History is often darker than fiction, and this will be your last warning before the video starts. This story starts in the year 1960 when Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He started life on the wrong foot as he grew up in a very messed up life. His home life was strange as he was doted on when he was young, but things weren't as they seem and cracks in his home life started to show because his mother would be a tense individual who was argumentative, and she craved attention so often she was in her own world and Dahmer was often left on the side. His father was not really a present figure, and when he was home most of his time was spent fighting with his mother. Dahmer, to say the least, was ignored, as they wouldn't devote any time to him and didn't really bother checking up on him, which gave him a feeling of isolation at a young age. This could help explain his rocky relationships with his future partners. As time progressed, Dahmer's mother got worse, as she was a hypochondriac, and she also suffered from depression, and during one of her lowest points, she tried to end her life. Her depression drove her away from Dahmer, and Dahmer never really felt like he belonged to the family. These were early telltale signs of emotional abandonment, so he became a quiet and timid person. After the birth of his brother and his parents moving, Dahmer was the least of their concerns, so Jeffrey would indulge in outside activities. He took interest in dissecting because of his father. His father was a scientist who showed him how to remove the skin from the bones with the use of bleach. This was done because his dad had wanted to fuel a curiosity into his own son, and to his father's delight, Dahmer began to experiment on various preservation methods. He found it fascinating, and this would later turn into a twisted obsession. Initially, this was innocent, but this hobby was used in a very twisted way. So Dahmer was obsessed with collecting animal bones, and he would dissect animals and study their bone structures, as well as their anatomy. He was disturbed, but he probably could have been helped, but this help never came to fruition. His parents were busy fighting constantly, as well as the fact he had a brother. His brother took all of his attention, so he slowly started to be alone for a long time, which was the reason he became the Milwaukee Monster. During his high school years, he was an outcast because he was very quiet, but he started doing things like drinking alcohol, and he was bold as he would drink in broad daylight. During one incident, he was questioned by a peer. During this time, Dahmer would discover that he was homosexual during this time. He was a closeted homosexual and he repressed his desires. This was during a time homosexuality was not the norm. People would go as far as to torment them, or parents would even disown their own children just for being gay. So understandably, he remained silent, but he did manage to score a date with a teenage boy. He never got intimate, but during this time he would fantasize about dominating and controlling a submissive male, which is okay, especially nowadays, but the problem was that his twisted fantasies would involve dissection. He fantasized about a young male jogger, so he decided to try to ambush him with a baseball bat, but the jogger didn't appear that day, so he decided to give up. Dahmer admitted that this was his first attempt to attack someone. He wanted to make an individual submit to him. With all these freaky thoughts, you would think that Dahmer was a weird individual, at least in a social setting, right? Well, oddly enough, he wasn't disliked, as he was thought to be a normal individual who was a class clown. He had superficial charm, which made him likable. Finally, after years of fighting, his parents decided to file a divorce in 1977. Because his mother's affairs was brought up to light, and in 1978, his dad left after the divorce was finalized. This all happened during his senior year of high school. He managed to graduate, but he did run into trouble when he was caught drinking alcohol in the parking lot by a teacher, and during that confrontation, he revealed his terrible home life, but not much came from it. So when the divorce finalized, both of his parents left, and his mother took custody of his younger brother, and Dahmer remained at the family home because he was already 18 years old. His crimes would start in 1978, 3 weeks after he graduated his first murder. He took place on June 18th. The main victim was a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, who was 19 years old. He was lured into Dahmer's house with the promise of drinks. The young man was lured into the house with no care, and this would be his fatal mistake. During this time, they were both drinking, and Hicks bare-chested aroused Dahmer, and they were deep in conversation about their love life. Hicks would talk about his sexual experiences with girls, and after a while, Dahmer would strike Hicks in the head with a dumbbell. He would eventually strip Hicks naked and jerked off on top of Hicks's corpse. He would later take his body down to the basement and dissect it, and he dug a shallow grave and buried the body. Eventually, he would retrieve the body and dissolve Hicks's body in acid, and he would crush the bones and then scatter the remains in the woodland behind his family home. This was Dahmer's first murder, and got away with no trace, and then Dahmer enrolled at Ohio State University. He was hoping to major in business, but things didn't go well because Dahmer had terrible grades and was very unproductive because of his drinking habits. He failed most of his classes aside from one, but his grades were downright awful. His father would visit on occasion, only to find endless amounts of empty liquor bottles in his house, and there was tension as his father wanted him to study as he had paid in advance for his classes, so they came to an agreement when he decided to enroll in the army. During this time, he was trained as a medical specialist, and he did okay, but he was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication, and on one occasion, he was reprimanded for insubordination, and his platoon was punished, and he was beaten by his fellow recruits because of the incident. Dahmer was an average soldier that had nothing special going for him, but he did his work. But due to his alcohol abuse, he was unsuitable to serve in the military due to his deteriorating health. And in 1981, he was honorably discharged because his superiors didn't see anything wrong with him, oddly enough. When he was back, he wouldn't return home because he felt like he couldn't face his father, and he moved to South Carolina and he was provided a passport to go anywhere in the US, so he traveled to Florida. Life was pretty boring, but he would spend most of his salary drinking and was evicted because of it, and he eventually went home to Idaho with his dad. So he was living with his dad and his stepmom, and he would drink heavily, and he was arrested for public intoxication, and he eventually moved to his grandmother's house. Dahmer's grandmother was the only caring figure in his life. She showed him affection, something his mother and father failed to provide for such a long time. This move was done so Dahmer could change his ways and quit his excessive drinking and turn his life around. Dahmer followed the house rules whilst living with her, except he didn't stop drinking and smoking. He found a job and held it down for 10 months before being laid off, and he was unemployed from 1982 to 1984. But he later found a job in 1985 for a chocolate factory and things were back on track. On one occasion there was an incident that would change him. During his stay at a public library, a man offered to give him oral sex, and he didn't respond to the man, but he would later fantasize about dominance and would start to frequent gay bars, gay bathhouses, and bookstores. He later stole a mannequin and used it for his own pleasures, and he would discard it after his grandmother ordered him to throw it away. He was starting to be a regular at the bar and the bathhouse, and he would start to think of people as objects of pleasure, and through this he began to disregard human life, as he would pull a Bill Cosby and put sleeping pills and drinks, and then would take the poor victims to his house, and then he would perform various sexual acts.
Serial killer.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
He would later get banned from a bathhouse after he was reported for his misdeeds, so he took to the streets and took his victims to hotels. Dahmer had some very dark fantasies that are disturbing to say the least, but after he saw a report about a young man's funeral, he thought of stealing the corpse of a dead man. And in 1986, he was finally arrested for indecent acts, but he was later caught jerking off in front of two young boys. He was put on probation in 1987 for his charges, and he had to undergo counseling, but that never really helped him because he was already past the point of no return. There was nothing that could be done to stop him. On November 20th, 1987, he encountered a 25-year-old man, Stephen Tomey, his next victim. They started off in a bar where Dahmer was doing his regular routine of trying to bring men back into his hotel. He had no intent to murder him, at least initially. After drugging Tomey, he was exploring his body and then called it a night. He later woke up and found Tomey was lying there dead with a hole in his chest, and Dahmer's hand was bloodied and bruised. He had no recollection of what had happened, but panic set in. He had a body, and it was only a matter of time before someone found something to be off. In a panic, he decided to buy a large suitcase big enough to transport a body. He took the body home, and he would quickly try to dispose of it while he had time. During this time, he had dismembered the body and he proceeded to burn the body in acid, all but Tomey's head. He later boiled it to preserve the skull and used it for his personal pleasure. Eventually, he disposed of it because it became too brittle, so he disposed of it with no one ever finding out what was going on. This was the second murder he had gotten away with, and this was just the starting point for his rapid killing sprees. This was the second murder he had gotten away with, and this encouraged him to keep going as his urge would get worse and worse. During this time, things had gotten worse. His killing spree would take place during the late 80s, all the way into 1991 when he was caught. A plethora of men were dragged into his house. He took to the streets because he was banned from the bars and from the bathhouses. He would lurk around the bar, and then he would talk to his potential victims. It would become worse and worse since no one suspected anything. Most people thought he was nothing more than a weird guy. Shortly after getting away with the murder of Stephen Tomey, he would later approach a young 14-year-old, James Stockstider, who was promised $50 if he modeled nude, and he shared the same fate as Stephen. His third victim was killed at its grandmother's house. After this, in the year 1988, he would lure another victim into his house, Richard Guerrero, with the same promise of $50, but this time he requested Richard to spend the night with him, but those $50 were never received, as he would become the fourth victim, never to be seen. His body was used for Dahmer's own twisted pleasure, yet again. He later dismembered his body, but things were getting more and more difficult. Because the corpses were in various states of decay, he had various remains he would try to dispose of in a vat of acid. His grandmother was becoming more and more annoyed, because Dahmer had brought in a lot of men with him, and the horrible smell would permeate throughout the whole house, coming from the basement. His grandmother had had enough and told him to move out, so he quickly found a new one-bedroom apartment, and things would go well. Eventually, Dahmer was arrested and was charged with second-degree sexual assault when he drugged and molested a 13-year-old boy. The victim, Kyson Synthesifome, escaped and reported Dahmer. He only spent a week in jail after his bail was paid for. It's kind of odd because he only faced a week in jail for molesting a kid. It is rather frustrating that things didn't escalate because he had a repeated pattern of taking advantage of people time and time again. The next victim was Anthony Sears, who was a young, aspiring model. So Dahmer did the same song and dance where he just lured his victim home. But he didn't do it at his house, fearing that the police might be watching his house. So he brought him into his grandmother's house, and he would dismember him and keep his head in a box that he kept in his work locker. This was insane, since at this point he was so overconfident because authorities didn't know about his deepest and darkest secrets. This was his fifth victim that Jeffrey got away with, and no one had caught on to what he was doing. As for his case, Dahmer was sentenced to 12 months in jail and 5 years of probation for second-degree sexual assault. He was allowed to go back to his normal life, but he was a registered sex offender, and things didn't change as no one raised any concerns about his activities. After he was released from jail in May of 1990, he would kill Raymond Smith, who was a 32-year-old prostitute, and he would dispose of his victim. He kept the skull of his victim, and this was his second skull that was added to his collection alongside his last victim, Sears. The smell of the rotting bodies did seep out of his room, and his neighbors complained about the smell, which he just said was caused by his broken fridge, and it was going to get fixed. Quickly thereafter, he would kill his next victim a month later in June. His next victim was 27-year-old Edward Smith, which he would try to preserve in the freezer for several months, which he would later discard the corpse because it had fallen apart.
His next murder was far more brutal than his previous one, and this is because he didn't have his conventional sleeping pills. So his next victim, Ernest Miller, had his throat slit. He met the same fate as previous victims, and Dahmer's bloodlust was at an all-time high. During this time, Dahmer would admit to eating the bodies of the victims. His crazy killing spree didn't stop. Only 3 weeks after his next victim was David Thomas. His victim after this was Curtis Strouder, who was a 17-year-old who shared the same fate as he was lured in with a promise of money for a nude pic. He would also be cannibalized by Dahmer. In a later interview, he would say the reason as to why he ate his victims.
Of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. Then I tried to keep the person alive.
During this time, Dahmer would keep some of the remains of his victims on his person or around his house, and no one caught on to what was going on. It was as if he was trying to get caught on purpose, but he wasn't. In April of 1991, he would commence his darkest experiment with his next victim, Earl Lindsay, who was 19 years old. Dahmer wanted to preserve the victim, but he wanted to keep him in a zombie-like state in order to keep the victim alive. He decided to drill a hole into Earl's head and poured hydrochloric acid, but Lindsay somehow remained conscious. And then Dahmer gave up and decided to dispose of him. In the next month, he would lure 31-year-old Anthony Hughes into his apartment and kill him. Not much happened with Anthony, but he would try to produce another mindless zombie with his next victim, Kornak Synthesome, who was 14 years old and the younger sibling of Kyson Synthesome. Kornak was rendered brain dead because of the acid that was poured into his head, but he somehow managed to get out of the house screaming like crazy. Kornak was found the following morning by the three women who were just passing by. So then Dahmer came out of his apartment and saw them huddling over the boy. Then shortly thereafter, the police had arrived and started questioning both sides, and Dahmer claimed that they had a lover's quarrel because Kornak had drunk too much and Dahmer wanted to just take him home. The women protested against his claims, and in an odd twist of fate, the police believed Dahmer's story. And when the women protested, the officers didn't listen and let Dahmer into his apartment. They did comment on the smell of his apartment. The situation was dismissed by the officers. People have speculated that the officers didn't expect it due to racism or sexism. But, to be fair, I haven't found any concrete evidence. But the police had overlooked the state of the young Kornak because he had a hole in his head where he was bleeding from, and they didn't do their due diligence when it came to investigating. They let Dahmer slip away scot-free. Kornak sadly didn't live for too long, as he was injected with a lethal dose of acid to his brain, and he shared the same fate as earlier victims, as his body was dismembered. During the June and July of 1991, Dahmer was on a killing spree as he would lure countless victims into his apartment. Jeremiah Weiberger, Oliver Lacey, and Joseph Bradhoft lost their lives as they were lured into Dahmer's clutches. During this time, Dahmer probably felt unbeatable since he had gotten away with murder time and time again, with no one even suspecting anything. So Dahmer let his guard down since he felt invincible. During this time, he only had a few slip-ups, and not much came from those outcomes. He wasn't caught because he was smart, or because he was very good at keeping the police away. The reason why he wasn't caught was because he was lucky. During this time, Dahmer would soon push his luck past the point of no return when he met the 32-year-old Tracy Edward. Tracy was not like the others because he came in with a lot of caution after he caught a whiff of the foul smell in the air, as well as the boxes of hydrochloric acid. Suddenly, he had a gut feeling that things were off. During this time, fight or flight kicked in as Tracy was handcuffed by Dahmer as he was brandishing a knife. And during this time, Tracy was on high alert, as this could mean life or death, so he decided to hear out what Dahmer wanted to do. But he was a quick one, as he waited until Dahmer took his eyes off him for a split second. And in that split second, Dahmer was punched in the face. During this time, Tracy opened the door and ran for dear life down the hallway of the apartment complex while screaming bloody murder. Tracy told the police that a crazy man had taken him hostage as he had run away from him, and shortly thereafter, Tracy would lead the police to Dahmer's location where everything he had done came to light. Initially, Dahmer was calm in all of this as he allowed the police to check out his place, but things would shortly fall apart as Dahmer confessed to handcuffing Tracy, explaining that it was some sort of kink, and Dahmer went to retrieve the key. But the police's attention was caught because the nightstand where the key was placed had an open drawer that contained some Polaroid images that revealed all of Dahmer's atrocities. Both officers in awe with the discovery, and one officer in awe said, "These are for real." At this moment, they had caught on to the twisted carnage that Dahmer had committed. In the panic, Dahmer attempted to flee, but he was promptly subdued by the officer, and an immediate investigation took place. Police opened his fridge and discovered human remains in his refrigerator and freezer. They found a lot of Polaroid pictures, several skulls in his kitchen, several remains that were preserved, such as 2 entire skeletons, sexual organs, 2 human hearts, and several body parts that were submerged in a vat of acid. The jig was up, and Dahmer's reign of terror was put to an end as he was awaiting trial for 17 murders, and Dahmer was to serve 16 consecutive life sentences for his crimes. During this time, he was confronted with the family of the victims. Several neighbors testified against him. Tracy also testified, and during this, one of the victims' statements from Rita Isabel, the older sister of Errol Lindsay, had an emotional outburst. She spoke out and even threatened his life, as she was grief-stricken over the fact that her brother was killed by a twisted man. She was promptly escorted out, but not after bursting into tears, and the same sentiment was felt by the families of the victims. It is difficult to think about the pain of the families. A lot of them had friends and families left behind. Luck was no longer on Dahmer's side, as the walls came crashing in and he was put in prison. During an interview, Dahmer admitted that he was addicted to the lifestyle and that prison was the only place that he belonged. He said that if he was ever to come out of jail, he would go back to his old life, further terrorizing the streets of Milwaukee. During his life in prison, Dahmer was a very calm guy, and he was liked by prisoners and guards, but he would make a lot of morbid jokes, alluding to his past. Most prisoners were disturbed by his antics. He would mold his food to resemble severed limbs and body parts. He would hold his status as a cannibal with honors. Oddly enough, he would ask for forgiveness to God as he was studying Christianity and got baptized. He started reading the Bible and following its teachings. Roy Ratcliffe helped him with his baptism, and he had converted. People question if he was truly sincere because he already didn't have the best track record. Maybe he wanted to clear his head and start anew, or he wanted to forget his crimes. A prisoner tried to kill him during a chapel service, but the attack failed as the makeshift knife he made had broke. Although his fate was sealed when on November 28, 1994, he was cleaning the prison gym alongside Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The guard left them unsupervised for half an hour. During that time, Christopher isolated Jesse and killed him by bludgeoning him, and he would later go to Dahmer and do the same. Dahmer was pronounced dead an hour after the attack. Jesse also didn't fare well either. Both prisoners died at the hands of Scarver. People had different reaction to Dahmer's death. On one end, people thought he deserved a death, whilst others wanted him to suffer in jail. Either way, Scarver took matters into his own hands when he took Dahmer's life. Scarver didn't regret his actions, as he thought he also deserved the death penalty. But Wisconsin doesn't allow the death penalty. This was the end for the Milwaukee cannibal, who died at the ripe old age of 34 in prison.
You're shorty, yeah, giving down, yeah, yeah. Knock it off the park and send her home, yeah, yeah. Now I'm sitting here,